Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dov Waxman, the director of the Younes Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, and the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Chair of Israel Studies at UCLA. Thank you so much for joining us for this year's Younes Nazarian Memorial Lecture. The Nazarian Center owes its existence to the generosity and vision of Younes Nazarian and his wife, Soraya. This lecture series honors his memory. In this recorded message, their daughter, Sharon Nazarian, who chairs the Nazarian Center's Community Advisory Board, will tell you a bit about her father.
Hello, I'm Sharon Nazarian, the daughter of Younes Nazarian of blessed memory. And this second annual Younes Nazarian Memorial Lecture, I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us. This year, the holding of the Memorial Lecture had a very special significance to my mother, Soraya, to my siblings, and really the entire Nazarian family. The past year, since October 7th, all of us, as Jews and as a community, have experienced change in our lives in a way we would have never anticipated. The holding of this memorial lecture was directly connected with the aftermath of the horrors of October 7th. And our selection of Dr. Fania Oz spoke directly to her moral and strong voice on what has happened in Israel and indeed to the global Jewish experience. We're very sorry that due to the circumstances in Israel today, Dr. Oz could not join us in person and for us to hold this lecture in person at UCLA. My family and I would love to make sure that Dr. Oz returns to us in person at UCLA in order to meet with us, to meet with students and faculty, and share the really distinct analysis, thoughtfulness that she has had for her whole career. My father was a true Zionist. His life story, in a way, replicated Israel's experience itself. He immigrated to Israel in 1950, right after the establishment of the State of Israel, as a young man. And it was in those years that he spent in Israel, he truly found his identity, not only as a young man, but also as a Jewish person who had been born and raised in Iran in a system of segregation and oftentimes oppression. He found his freedom in Israel. And when he returned to Iran and established his family, again in 1978, he saw that his family's safety and security was endangered because of the impending Iranian Revolution. So yet again, he uprooted his family and we all moved to Israel in 1978 through 79. For him, the State of Israel has had a deeply personal and meaningful role in the establishment of his identity and his life's arc. For us, as his children and his family, Israel also represents this notion of Jewish freedom, Jewish right to self-determination. The establishment of the Center for Israel Studies in the name of my father and mother over 20 years ago was a manifestation of that desire. The desire for UCLA students, faculty, and indeed the whole community to be better educated with a nuance and depth that often is lacking in our media and even in other classrooms. We're very proud of our affiliation with the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, and we're very thrilled to welcome Dr. Oz to this second annual memorial lecture in our father's name. Thank you, Dr. Oz, from myself, my mother, and indeed the whole Nazarian family for everything that you do day in and day out. And I want to thank the Nazarian Center staff for making sure this memorial lecture is as meaningful as we had hoped it would be. Thank you so much.
So as Sharon noted in her video message, today's lecture was supposed to be taking place in person, on our campus, but unfortunately, because of the recent events in Israel and Lebanon, the flights have been cancelled. She tried her very best to get here, but that wasn't possible. But we're very happy that we're able to bring this to you via Zoom, so many more people can listen to this lecture. We had originally chosen the date for this lecture a few days ago, which was to take place a few days ago, to mark the first anniversary of the horrific Hamas-led attack that took place in southern Israel on October the 7th, 2023, just over a year ago. That terrible day was, as we know, the deadliest day in Israel's history. And the year that followed has been, I think, the most devastating and challenging one for Israeli society, marked by a grinding, devastating war in Gaza and now an escalating conflict in Lebanon. Israelis have been dealing with their grief over the many Israelis killed on October the 7th and in the year since then, their worry and fear for the lives of the hostages still held captive in Gaza, the ongoing security risks in their daily lives, mounting international criticism over Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza, rising domestic extremism, and a political leadership that has lost the trust of much of the Israeli public. For anyone concerned about Israel and its future, these are deeply troubling times. But we must not despair. Pessimism and cynicism are not the answer. Instead, in this darkness, we must find reasons for hope. For the past year, our speaker has been a rare voice of hope amidst all the anguish. She has never shied from criticizing Israel's leadership, but also never refrained from expressing her conviction that a better future is possible for both Israelis and Palestinians. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Fania Oz-Salzberger. She is an Israeli historian, author, and public intellectual. She was born and raised in Kibbutz Hulda, served as an intelligence officer in the IDF, and is Professor Emerita of History at the University of Haifa's Faculty of Law and Center for German and European Studies. She formerly held a full professorship and the Israel Studies Chair at Monash University in Melbourne, as well as a visiting professorship for distinguished teaching at Princeton University's Center for Human Values. She was also a fellow of the Jerusalem Institute for Advanced Studies and of the Federal Institute for Advanced Studies in Berlin. Dr. Oz-Salzberger's doctoral thesis from Oxford University was mentored by philosopher Isaiah Berlin, my intellectual hero. She also holds an honorary doctoral degree from Uppsala University in Sweden and is a member of the German Federal Republic's Order of Merit. Her books include Translating the Enlightenment, Israelis in Berlin, Frankfurt am Main, and with her late father, Amos Oz, Jews and Words. In her talk today, Dr. Oz-Salzberger will present the case for reclaiming the humanist legacy of Zionism. After her talk, there'll be time for questions from the audience, so please do send us your questions using the Q&A box. And now, let me turn over with great pleasure to Professor Fania Oz-Salzberger.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Dov. Dear Soraya and Sharon Nazarian, dear Nazarian family. Dear students and faculty, community members, organizers, and hosts. Dear audience, Shalom. War has prevented me from attending this event, as has been said, in person. War is raging in my part of the Middle East. We had sirens and missiles here in Zichron Yaakov only yesterday morning. So here I am digitally, but not detached. Not as a detached academic, not as an objective intellectual, not as a visitor from planet Mars. On the 7th of October 2023, Eli and I were among the lucky ones who were not directly bereaved, but people we love and cherished were bereaved in the most brutal and barbaric way. You all know the numbers. The population to murder ratio, 7th of October was 13 times, some people say more, than 9/11. And unlike the great horror of 9/11, here was on the ground cruelty. Here was massacre by hand. murderers jeering at their victims and at the camera. Thousands of men dehumanized so completely that they proudly documented their dehumanization. It's been a year and we are not even post-traumatic. We are still living in hell. As one Israeli wrote the other day, how come it's already the 7th of October when it's still the 7th of October of the past year? This speech will be in part political. There is no other honest way to deliver it. We are here to commemorate, as I would have said on the 7th of October, a Jewish and Israeli catastrophe. I will soon get to the far warmer and happier commemoration of the late Younes Nazarian. But the Palestinians are part of our story too, and part of our future. Also, the voice of Israel today, as you know, is split more than ever into several competing voices. I'm here to humbly offer one of them. So let us speak of Zionism, more specifically about the core definition of Zionism, its good and useful legacy in my book, and its utter relevance to us today. I will not be speaking to the multitudes on the streets or in the social media who are bashing or ridiculing any use of the word Zionism, ignorantly claiming that it is some satanic cult. Instead, I'd like to reach out to the moderates, including, of course, pro-Palestinian moderates, to offer a better lexicon, to help prepare a global conversation gone bad. In fact, not only gone bad, but gone berserk, with hatred, disinformation, and manipulative lies. Any hope for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, a distant but viable peace, depends on Zionism remaining in the conversation. It is a useful word for those hoping, as I do, for a future horizon gradually opening up for peace. If there is ever peace, not tomorrow morning, it will be a peace of the moderates. Both Zionism and the Palestinian claim for sovereignty will be part of it. And as I say on the networks, deal with it. More daringly, perhaps, I will put forward a claim that the historic mainstream Zionism was humanist at its core, because its claim to independent nationhood for the Jews was rooted in a wider recognition of the value of all human lives, dignity, belonging, and civil self-expression. Younes Nazarian was, from all I hear about him, a humanist Zionist. I'm speaking today in his beloved memory. A vast majority of the victims of the 7th of October mega massacre were humanist Zionists. Over the last year, I have read and in some cases helped to edit the stories of their lives, deeds, and dreams. I'm speaking today also in their cherished memory. Some of the victims were very close to people I love. The sense of loss is unfathomable. They belong to my Israel, not merely because so many of them were kibbutzniks, music-loving people, liberals, but because they all they ever wanted, all of them, was life, peace, and normality within the legally recognized borders of their homeland. Deeper still, they wanted to be full members of the family of humankind, which is precisely what the Zionist movement in its historical mainstream wanted for the Jewish people, and by extension to all other peoples. No less and no more. Younes Nazarian was a humanist Zionist in his deepest belief, in his life story, and in his effective life's work. I recently asked his daughter Sharon to tell me what he and my late father, Amos Oz, why they got on so well together in the several times they met. Her reply was eye-opening. Sharon remembers a dinner where, and I quote her, our fathers traded jokes with one another. They were both full of joy in so many ways. They also lived long enough, Sharon wrote, to understand the arch of history and of Israel in a way many young people don't understand today. They were both men of consequence, men who did not take themselves too seriously, and yet also understood the responsibility they carried on their shoulders. I think that Younes Nazarian's arc of history deeply informed his love for Israel. For the same Israel I have just described, the Jewish and democratic Israel. The Israel of the Declaration of Independence, with its long historical memory of the land and its full commitment to civic equality and Jewish-Arab coexistence. It was in this sense that Younes was both a humanist and a Zionist, and he evidently saw no contradiction between these terms. Neither did my late father, and because such bad times have come upon us and upon Zionism, and upon humanist Zionism, and upon the Palestinians, I'm glad, to be honest, that neither Younes nor my father lived to see this. It has become increasingly challenging to defend even the word Zionism, its core concept, let alone its humanist inner grain. So I owe you, and I owe the memory of Younes, and I owe the victims of the 7th of October, the debt of clarity. Clarity is no longer a luxury, it is an urgent duty. And a clear definition of Zionism can benefit not only the friends of Israel, but also the friends of Palestine, as long as they are also the friends of peace and of truth. What is Zionism? The term's core meaning is very simple. Zionism is the Jewish national movement. That's it. In a few further words, Zionism is the belief that Jews are entitled to their national home in their ancestral land, within their ancestral land, because every individual has the right to belong to a nation, and every nation has the right to be free. Not all nations have actually got this right in practice. Many do. Core Zionism does not demand the whole ancestral land, from the river to the sea. Although a small minority of Zionist founders did claim it, but they were a small minority. Core Zionism is perfectly compatible with territorial compromise. It encourages peace with peace-seeking neighbors. Given the right circumstances, good peace with goodwill, caution, and security guarantees, it fully accommodates a future Palestine next to Israel. We can argue about the two-state solution. We can have a heated Jewish, Arab, and global debate about it. But there's no denying that the core Zionist vision allows it. Hence, the Jewish leadership's and public's acceptance of the United Nations Partition Resolution 181 on the 29th of November, 1947. This resolution gave both Jews and Palestinians small sovereign countries within the historic borders of the land they both claim as their home. In the noisy chaos of historical distortion, let us remember that crucial moment in which Jews danced in the streets and Palestinians opened fire. What could have been a great moment of peacemaking and a new neighborhood yielded Israel's independence within larger borders, later internationally recognized, broader borders. It yielded the Palestinians' Nakba, a tragedy for both nations, and after 76 years, a regional crisis turning global as we speak. The simple core definition I have given here is often distorted. It is recklessly demonized and weaponized by the enemies and haters of Israel. But it is also brutally defaced and distorted by extremist Jewish nationalists within Israel. This too has to be said. The concept of Zionism has been, as said, manipulated by Israel's dire enemies, the currently ruling government of Iran, its terrorist proxies in the Middle East, and their intellectual and media friends. Very often, I think, false friends. It is being weaponized every day by an ignorant, self-styled global left. Not all the left, of course, I'm left in a different way. Who wants to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth, accomplishing a monstrous sort of peace in the Middle East, the peace of dead Jews. Intellectuals and activists all over the Western world are doing their utmost to wipe Zionism off the lexicon of decent conversation. Peddlers of false facts have twisted it, distorted it, weaponized it. And I'm here to tell you in the clearest possible terms, I am a Zionist. Almost all Jewish Israelis, including quite a few ultra-Orthodox, including some Palestinian Israeli citizens, are Zionists. Millions of their friends around the world are Zionists. And we are not going away anytime soon. We are here to stay, and the only force that can destroy us is our own social and political divide. And to the Jewish Israeli extremists, a small but effective and growing minority, who are undermining the Zionist legacy by replacing human equality with Jewish superiority, I say just as vehemently, we, the heirs to the moderate mainstream Zionism, are not going away. Not unless you terminally ruin our society and democracy and culture. Our commitment to our country's security extends to protecting our democracy too. Our civic equality, our respect and friendship towards non-Jews, and our hope for peace. If Jews are in Israel to stay, so are the Palestinians. Anyone who refuses to accept both facts is part of the problem. Anyone who accepts both facts is part of a potential solution. But which Israel is here to stay? That of the core Zionist ideal? Supremacists fight Arab fanatics and supremacists, both sides claiming river to sea, exchanging blows to kingdom come. Is this the Israel that's here to stay? When I say that Israel is here to stay, I'm morally bound to speak of the kind of Israel that I and millions of Israelis like me are vowing to keep, protect, rebuild, and improve. Now, my father used to say that the Zionist movement from its very cradle in the late 19th century was a coalition of differing dreams. There was the middle-class liberal Zionism of Theodor Herzl. There was the social justice Zionism of the labor founding fathers and mothers. There were Adi Gordon, Berl Katzenelson, Ben Gurion, Golda Meir, all scions of the labor Zionism. There was the fiery biblical romantic Zionism of Ze'ev Jabotinsky and the revisionists. There was the legal diplomatic Zionism of Chaim Weizmann and the jurists who authored the Declaration of Independence, who carefully laid out Israel's just claim for global legitimacy. But all these movements and people had in common, including the revisionists, ancestors of today's erring rogue Likud, what they all had in common was that the state of the Jews would be a liberal democracy, a human rights-based democracy, a rule of law-based democracy, offering equality to all its citizens, peace to its neighbors, and law-abiding membership in the international community. They also hoped that Israel would bring some good to the world, because Zionism was about that too. For some, it was the kibbutz and its promise of a better society, hardworking, well-educated, prosperous and free, strong on solidarity, with no rich and poor, but unlike the communist dictatorships, committed to liberty and intellectual and individual dignity. For others, it was science and technology. Even early Zionism was already high-tech in its application, as we know, of modern agriculture, medicine, and civil self-organization. Perhaps a new type of peaceful and groundbreaking modernity was in the heart of many of those early Zionists. Herzl was a great modernist visionary who wanted to liberate the Jews so that they could help liberate the world. Few people remember today that from the Second Zionist Congress, 1897 onwards, female delegates were given equal vote and participation. The Zionist movement believed in equal suffrage and gender rights before, in some cases long before, any existing state in the world. Moreover, Zionists chose to bring to the fore the best of our ancient Jewish legacy, with Jerusalem poised to become a center of peace and light unto the nation in Herzl's famous novel Alt Neuland, Old New Land. It is not accidental that of all the riches of Jewish tradition, of all our enormous library of living legacies, Israel's Declaration of Independence chose to highlight the morality of the prophets, which is the most universalist and all-round humanist part of the Bible, that and the social laws of the Torah. Peace among the nations, social justice, human compassion, the Jews as leaders and servants of world peace, not as masters of war, rather than conquerors and empire makers, a nation of teachers in its tiny, luminous land. Some bits of these dreams came true, others didn't. Some may still come true if we can save and renew the authentic legacy of the founding fathers and mothers and sharpen it with the lessons we have all learned in our lifetime. Israeli democracy is worth nothing without security. Israeli security is worth nothing without democracy. Both are worth nothing without full membership in the better part of the global community and without a future vision of peace. Let me at this point make two asides, two important footnotes to my presentation. The first is about politics, the second about Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. Our gathering here today is spiritual, it is memorial, it is immensely painful, but it is not apolitical. The 7th of October was political. Many of its victims were very political people. Zionism is political. We cannot depoliticize these concepts. And those of you who know me know that I'm a deeply political person. As the wonderful Polish poet Wisława Szymborska once wrote, we are the children of the era, and the era is political. Politics is an ugly word only when it's wielded by murderous fanatics or corrupt, self-serving players. It is, by contrast, a beautiful word when it ignites the souls of good people and inspires them to good deeds. I adamantly hug and bless the memories of the wonderful souls from the kibbutzim, Nir Oz, Kfar Aza, Be'eri, and the others, who had spent their lives volunteering and helping sick people in Gaza to reach Israeli hospitals, who rallied for peace, who struggled for Israeli democracy since the current government came to power. I will not depoliticize the blessed memory of Vivian Silver or Alex Danzig murdered in captivity, or the hero Kinneret Gat, whose footage sticking her tongue out to her murderers was aired for the first time only 2 weeks ago. Kinneret Gat. You and I may or may not politically agree with these people's opinions and dreams and hopes. We here in this webinar are likely to disagree on Israeli as well as US politics. We may not agree what is right and good for Israel or for the United States. But if we agree about Israel's right to exist and to prosper, we must do what the early Zionist movement performed so wisely. Conduct a rational, well-argued discussion and take our political differences a notch higher to the level of principle. Perhaps we can reach moral concurrence. Perhaps we can find common and time-tested values, a shared vision, horizon, and hope. This is what the early Zionist movement so wisely did. The second footnote is on Jewish-Arab relations since the dawn of Zionism. I will not enter the fray on who is responsible for the conflict, who started it all, who misresponded, who miscalculated, who made terrible mistakes, which side caused more pain and suffering. We know both sides' narratives all too well. But we have a duty to stick with historical facts. Truth is truth, especially in the age of fake and spin. It is a fact that the Jewish undergrounds, the Palmach and the IDF, on the tough road to Israel's independence, on the unending quest for Israel's security, conducted war crimes and atrocities too, alongside their heroic deeds, and hurt Arab innocents. I'm an Israeli and a Zionist, and as such, I must bear this burden of truth, just as I expect honest Palestinians to bear the burden of their leadership's historical errors and barbaric. People talk about truth and reconciliation. Reconciliation, I think, for us is a long way away, perhaps a generation or two. But truth must be told right now, as we know it, unblinkingly, with the same duty expected from the other side. Second, we must not romanticize the Zionist movement. Not everyone shares Herzl's lofty utopia of a Jewish-Arab democracy, with equal rights to all citizens and incidentally voting rights for women, far ahead of the rest of the world. There were mutters, asides, protocol entries displaying racism and worse than racism in Israel. There were always such, and in the recent years too. There was the unfortunate formulation of a land without a people for a people without a land. There is currently a deadly war in Gaza, and there is fighting in Lebanon, and we must record and investigate any evidence of wrongdoing and war crimes. No major democratic nation and few minor democratic nations have come to the world on the wings of angels alone, Israel included. But truth, stark honesty, is a Zionist value. Third, we must make the same moral demand of the Palestinians. I am part of the Israeli left, but I would not romanticize the Palestinian national movement, which, in my view, was one of the ugliest in modern history. Nor would I accept any discourse of one-sided victimhood. My dream is to encounter still in my lifetime, or in my children's, a new moderate Palestinian leadership who would tell its people painful truths. I need to handle the painful truth of my own people as well. On the same note, the world, its media and opinion influencers have a duty too. They disregard it, but they have a duty. Honesty, factuality, perspective, proportion. Because if the bastion of truth tumbles and falls in Western culture, there would be no Israel, and there would be no Western and liberal culture. Please remember that in antiquity and again in the modern age, the Jewish legacy has flown straight into the veins of Western republicanism and Western liberal democracy, rule of law, human rights, all of them bear an ancient Hebraic fingerprint. We will not exist without this culture. We are its co-founders, and we have been among its greatest benefactors and beneficiaries. Judaism will not, cannot divorce Western liberalism. Zionism was the brainchild of both. Now, there are four great Zionist principles in my mind that are relevant to this hour: vision, pragmatism, modernism, and justice. Zionist vision was based on a nation state because it was born in the era when nation states were born. And Herzl rightly forecast that no Jews would ever be safe in a Europe shedding its Enlightenment legacy in a world divided into separate powers, often ignited by rampant, selfish, hyper-nationalism. As my great teacher, my late teacher, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, rightly identified, Zionism was never one of Europe's ultra-nationalist movement, what he called malignant nationalism, such as the German or the Italian national movements became. Zionism was from birth at its decisive mainstream, a movement of moderates. Starry-eyed dreamers, perhaps, heads in the clouds, perhaps, but feet planted firmly in the ground of history, practicality, and politics, the art of the possible. It was a moderate national movement, ignited by idealism, but deeply realistic and morally compassionate. This was the secret of its astonishing success. It contains a seed of inherent humanism and universal commitment, not only to Israelis, not only to Jews everywhere, but to the global community. National self-definition, civil rights, civic equality. Let me share a secret. The Jewish nation state is, in my mind, not an end, but a means to a higher end. The thriving and survival of its nation and citizens and neighbors. It is not an eternal goal, Jewish nationalism, nationhood, nation statehood. Perhaps one day history will turn a corner and the world will become a federation or a confederation or a grand United States or a global republic. This was the prediction of the great Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher admired by many Jews, perhaps because this was essentially the vision of the Hebrew prophets. A world with nations, but all at peace, all belonging to the same community. And when that happy moment comes, if it ever comes, I too would be glad to give up my nation state for a Middle Eastern confederacy or a world union. In that moment, yes, but not a moment before. We Jews have learned the hard way what it means to be a powerless minority in a world of brute force. Never again, but a Jewish state is not an end in itself. It is a means to the greater good, which Zionists, many Zionists sought, including my own kibbutzniks and Jerusalemite grandparents. Freedom, peace, creativity, solidarity, not just for Jews, but for everyone. We are one of the very few nations in the world for whom universal values have always been part of our national identity. Since the book of Genesis, since Abraham, since Moses, even when we were alone, defiant, separatists, unforgiving of our enemies and their grandchildren, even then our Torah laws of social justice and our prophets, humanism, shone bright from the very core of the Hebrew Bible. Universalism was and can still be our birthright. My Zionist forebears did not espouse either religious fanaticism or misguided progressivism or nihilist chaos mongering, and I will not tire of repeating this truth, that the Zionist movement at its core was not a disruptor. It offered a model and a bridge. The kibbutzim and moshavim offered a global model, while the Israeli Declaration of Independence offered its hand in peace to all its Arab residents, citizens, and neighbors, and promised equality to all its Arab citizens, authored in the midst of a devastating war of independence, also the Palestinian Nakba, in which not many people know that 1% of the Jewish population was killed, and no one in the world called it genocide. The declaration that Ben-Gurion read in Tel Aviv in May 1948 was and still is one of the most humane and universalist documents of its kind. It is a lasting source of pride, even if at the present bad moment, and I have to say this, many members of Israel's ruling coalition would not have signed it. But I hope that most Israeli citizens still would. A word on the principle of pragmatism. Genius of Herzl, Weizmann, and Ben-Gurion, and also of Golda and Rabin, was to bring about and protect the state of the Jews by achieving international legitimacy. Herzl courted emperors and kings. Weizmann accomplished the Balfour Declaration. Ben-Gurion navigated friends and foes, and with the profound support of many Jews and some non-Jews, received the greatest gift of all, Resolution 181, the partition plan that set up the legitimate state Israel. The United Nations was then still a new institution and still a beacon of hope. Not sure what has become of it since. Or rather, I can talk about it, but not here. The Zionist movement slipped through a small crack in history, in the sad and horrible history of the Jews, to create the state of Israel, not to replace the diaspora, as some overzealous Zionists, many of them still active in my childhood, thought, but to realign the Jewish world around an old, new sense, alt Neuland. One complaint against Israel's current government, which is not the topic of this talk, but I have to mention it, it is precisely this, that it seems to have abandoned the principle of pragmatism. The clever and worldwide ability of the founders of Zionism to gain international legitimacy while keeping the inner Jewish debates, the inner Zionist disputes, the whole noisy balagan that epitomizes Jewishness within the boundaries of civility, non-violence, democracy. This was perhaps Ben-Gurion's greatest achievement. And it began its great erosion in the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. I fear for it very much. A word on modernism. Its basic legacy is sliding away from under our feet. Global conversation is quickly losing the modernist values of rationality, human equality, and human improvement. The kind of postmodernism that imagines a world of disparate identities holding each other's throat, a pathetic competition of victimhoods, the black and white worldview of victims and perpetrators, the permission to resist the colonialists even by means of massacre and rape. This has become the geometric opposite of the modernist universal values. First and foremost, the duty to speak the truth. Homo sapiens is currently becoming Homo manipulatus. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict may become, alas, a historical pointer to the alarming rise of a politics of falsification and lies. Therefore, my move to reclaim the humanist legacy of Zionism is part of a greater mission to reclaim the best values of the Enlightenment, which reinvented universalism for the modern world, its expansion of the greatest biblical insights that everyone deserves to live, deserves to prospect, and is deserving of dignity. Please don't give these values up. They are not decorative slogans. Our current enemies, Iran's government, I never speak about the nation of Iran as an enemy, Hamas and Hezbollah, are inconceivably vile. My own countrymen and women are flooded with pain, rage, and loneliness. So hurt that many of them cannot at this stage imagine the pain of innocence on the other side, the very existence of innocence on the other side. Everyone in the Middle East is bleeding and deeply afraid. But what are we without a horizon? And what horizon is worth our hope, if not human equality and dignity? And no longer for peace now. It may have been possible in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, but that bird has flown. I'm adamantly for peace as a horizon, as the prophet Isaiah so beautifully put it, when the crooked line will be straightened. Perhaps not in our days, but not in eternity either. It has to come. Finally, justice. The most ancient Hebrew text ever discovered was discovered only about 25 years ago. It is a tiny stone with a Proto-Hebrew inscription dating from the 10th century before Common Era, the era of David and Solomon. It was excavated in Khirbat Keyafa in the Elah Valley, as I said, barely 2 decades ago. And it speaks of equal justice for the poor, for widows and orphans. Yes, it hails from before the same values were enshrined in the Torah, alongside the duty to the stranger among you. The Keyafa inscription and these humanist directives from the Torah and the human half of the 10 Commandments are my hard disk as an Israeli and as a modern Jew. They are our longitudes. If Israel loses its compass of justice along with its independent judiciary, this long lineage would be lost. Same goes for the United States and for any other human society that ever took pride in its moral and legal legacy. One of the worst results of the 7th of October is that most Jewish Israelis are still emotionally unavailable to the other, to the stranger, to the innocents on the enemy side. Our collective conscience was shot and badly injured on the 7th of October. And because war is upon us, healing has not even begun. But it's better to have an injured conscience than abandon all conscience. Take one side and cancel and obliterate the other. While wrestling with my own demons, I strongly reject any pro-Palestinian voice that has no such struggle. And I deeply welcome such Palestinians who can see and hear me too. Yeah, there are such people, both within Israel and outside, even in Gaza itself. Good and very brave people. May they rise to leadership and influence soon. I don't know if they will, but I wish they would. I still adamantly believe in a democratic and secure Israel next to a free and sovereign Palestine. I still believe in civil equality of Jews and Arabs within Israel and in peace with those Palestinians who want peace too. These are Zionist values. In good moments, I even believe in peace between Jews and Jews. So may we always remember the 7th of October, recall the individual names and faces and dreams of its numerous victims. May we keep the best parts of our Jewish and Zionist legacies alive, realistic, and hopeful. May we insist on telling the truth to others and especially to ourselves. May we never forget Jerusalem, but keep a healthy respect for Tel Aviv and its values too. And to the dear kibbutzim, long may you thrive. Your humble merits, your solidarity and sense of human justice, hail from at least the 10th century before Common Era. We shall yet dance, we shall yet smile. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very powerful and moving talk. It really, I'm sure, resonated with many members of our audience as well as for me. We have lots of questions coming in, which I will try to get to in just a moment. I want to begin, though, just picking up with what you laid out, I think, very, very powerfully and clearly, the kind of core idea of Zionism and the core principle of Zionism. And I want to, present kind of some of the challenges that I think have come up to that. And the first one I want to ask about, since this lecture has been held just a few days after Jews around the world commemorated the October 7th attack, mourned, as well as, of course, Israelis. The way in which the attack is sometimes described as a kind of pogrom against Jews, that this was a kind of anti-Semitic assault, and that the Jews in Israel who were murdered and kidnapped on that day were essentially much like Jews in, say, the Russian Empire in the late 19th century, facing murderous assaults from anti-Semitic mobs. So this is, a kind of continuation of Jewish history. Does that framing, this understanding of October the 7th as a kind of, another massacre in this long line of massacres across Jewish history, does that not undermine the very idea of Zionism, the idea that Jewish statehood has transformed the Jewish condition, that there's a fundamental difference between what it is to be a Jew in the state of Israel, in a Jewish state, than to be a Jew in the diaspora, that there is a fundamental disconnection between the Jewish faith today and the Jewish faith, say, a century or more ago? And what does it say if that does challenge this idea of Zionism, or at least the aspiration of Zionism? What does it say about the impact that Zionism has made on the Jewish consciousness, that is still the kind of framing or the reading that so many Jews, both in the diaspora and in Israel, have attached to the October 7th attack?
Well, it has certainly undermined many of our notions, much of our self-respect as Israelis, in the sense that we have always told our beloved Jewish cousins around the world, if you need safety, come to us. That's what we are here for. That was one of the raison d'etre of Zionism, obviously. So it was a terrible blow, which does not amount to undermining Zionism or even the value of security for Jews everywhere. But it is a terrible blow. No less undermining, by the way, to that particular Jewish narrative is the fact that from Menachem Begin onwards, prime ministers of the Likud, not Yitzhak Rabin, prime ministers of not Ehud Barak, but prime ministers of the Likud, have been waving the Holocaust like some kind of exchange note in the international market of ideas, and claiming a kind of a Jewish victimhood that my branch of Zionism never wanted to claim. We were not about victimhood. And therefore, I will not use the story of the 7th of October to seek the pity or the mercy of the world. I would use it for significant self-criticism and rethinking of the Israeli army, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, which failed in its mission, failed horribly. Of the Israeli government, you know what I think about its responsibility for this terrible day. And for the whole concept of how does Israel defend itself and help defend Jews in the world. But right now, it is much more common for me to see that Jews in the world are defending us Israelis, are standing up to us. And maybe this is a very good ground for rethinking the whole Israel diaspora relationship in a way that would make Israel less heroicized and romanticized, and more a partner to a real global problem, which is the hatred of Jews, as the old joke goes, more than is necessary. And in this, Israel has been hit now as hard as any Jew in the post-Holocaust world, and we shall need to discuss it together, to combat it together, not just militarily, of course, but by talking and reasoning. These are the tools that we have.
So thank you. Let me turn to another kind of challenge that has emerged toward vis-a-vis Zionism within the Jewish world. I'm going to talk more broadly in a minute, but and that is this kind of fashionable what's been called diasporism that has emerged within some parts of the Jewish diaspora, particularly among a younger generation of Jews outside Israel. You spend a lot of time in Germany. You know that that's become a kind of mecca of sorts for some younger Israelis, and there's this notion that that actually Jewish life is best or flourished or in the diaspora, and that there's this kind of renewed interest in diasporism. What do you say to kind of this notion of this romanticized diasporism that seems to be in vogue in some quarters today?
Yes, well, thank you for this question. I've authored the book Israelis in Berlin when I was living myself in Berlin for a sabbatical year back in 1999-2000, before it became a thing. And I've been speaking with these diasporists, Israeli diasporists, on many opportunities. But I have to say, I can intellectually fight with them about the wonderful things that Israel did give the world, not just the Jewish world. Three of them in particular: Tel Aviv, the kibbutz, and Hebrew culture. All of Hebrew culture wouldn't have come about in the diaspora. I don't think so. But having said that, I will give you a good Zionist pragmatic answer. As an expression I used in the lecture, this bird has flown. There are about 7 million, over 7 million Jews in Israel, 90-something% of which are self-declared Zionists. Of course, people come and go, people join us, people leave the country. Maybe there is a rise now in the number of people who leave the country because of both the war and the democracy situation. But we are here. We are a fact. A child born here, like my future grandchildren, they would be fourth or fifth generation to Zionists, to people living in this land. This is already their world and their culture. They might want to embrace diasporism when they grow up, but they are far more likely to want to remain on their home turf. This is a very homey country. I think some of you know that, and very strong on kin and kith, on family and friends and geographical proximity. It was lovely. It could become lovely again for us to live in, conditioned, of course, on the situation and on the future. So I respect these Hebrew, new Hebrew or Yiddish diasporists. I think they can do good to the wonderful multi-vocal harp of Jewish culture. But we Israelis are not going anywhere, and we shall not be bashed or ridiculed or humiliated by people who think that Israeli culture, like some people used to think, is inferior to historical Jewish culture. It is not, and we are very, very proud of it, and shall continue to be, I dearly hope.
Thank you. Okay, let me put another challenging question to you, if you don't mind. And again, this is talking about kind of strains of thought, and I'm wondering what you think of the relevance today, if at all, of a kind of cultural Zionism. You talked about the great achievement of that Zionism has brought of Hebrew culture and of the revival of the Hebrew language itself, which was, of course, the aspiration of cultural Zionists like Ahad Ha'am. And there's long been this strain of thought that kind of emphasizes the cultural dimension of Zionism and less the political dimension. It kind of focuses more on the creation of a flourishing Hebrew culture and literature, and less on the need for political power or statehood. Do you think that strain, this strain of cultural Zionism, is still viable, has any future, or is it really more of a kind of historical relic?
Well, Hebrew culture is alive and well in Tel Aviv today, in Jerusalem today, up and down the country. But I will give you a slightly more brutal answer. You know, back in 1921, the greatest Hebrew writers, Yosef Chaim Brenner, was murdered in Jaffa in one of the first Palestinian uprisings against the Jews, massacres of Jews. And it was then that many Jews living on the land and developing Hebrew culture and agriculture realized that we love and respect Hebrew culture, but we have to defend it, to protect its ass in order for it to exist. Now, Martin Buber, later in the 1930s, wanted some kind of a Jewish pacifism, Jewish Arab pacifism to emerge. It was a wonderful dream after the Second World War and after the ongoing military clashes, attacks by Palestinians, responses by the Jews. It turned out that it would not be. The last chance, as I said in my lecture, was in 1947 in November, when the United Nations decided on the partition, and the Palestinian side, the Arab side, decided not to accept it, and did not accept it in a very, very physical way by attacking the Jews. I think by then we were doomed to live on our sword, and we might have been able to change that in the immediate aftermath of the Six-Day War. We might have been able to change that had Rabin not been assassinated in 1995, and the Oslo Accords could have developed and gone through their prospective route. And we might still do it, but we have to defend our asses. I'm sorry. That's part of Hebrew culture today.
Thank you. Okay, I want to take now some questions that have come in from the audience, and I'm going to put a few of them together because they're asking about the status of this humanist Zionism that you've articulated, I think, so clearly and powerfully. So Harold Kalishman has sent in a question asking whether the erosion of humanist Zionism within Israel, whether the erosion of those values where do we see the beginning? Where do you trace the beginning of that? Was that in the election of Begin in the late 1970s, or do you think that the challenge began even before then?
Good question. I think it began before that with the very first Jewish takeovers of houses in Hebron and settlements, early settlements in the conquered West Bank after the 6-day war, in which the settlers' narrative, which impacted the mainstream and the leadership in ways which I think today are regrettable, was that we are the better Jews because we are the new settlers. We are back on the biblical land. They were holding the labor government, Golda and Rabin, especially Rabin, to ransom by waving the card of Yiddishkeit, being good Jews. And that should have stopped there and then. And I wish that the foundation of what then was called the Peace Now movement, was hoping for peace now, would have managed to persuade the Israeli public that this is not the kind of Judaism that we want or need in Israel. But that card, which is also held in a different way by the ultra-Orthodox, we are the better Jews, has a deep hold, almost a mysterious hold, on secular liberal minds until now. Now I think it is beginning to change. Now I think that Tel Aviv is telling both the ultra-nationalists and the ultra-Orthodox, you are not the better Jews. Perhaps we are. By being moderate, by wanting peace, by being humanists. So I hope this is a sea change in the history of Zionism today that is going to affect the coming years, hopefully in a positive way.
So we have a few questions that came in about the current status and future prospects, let's say, of this humanistic Zionism. A question that comes in from Elite Salzman: how can this humanistic Zionism once again become a kind of dominant strand in Israeli politics and society? And a similar question from Steve Gevinson: what would it take? What's necessary for it to happen? Whether in the next election or beyond, to kind of to empower that politically, that voice, that strain, and return it as it once was to the center of Israeli politics and political power.
Well, in many ways, even the centrist part of the political map in Israel is expressing most of the humanist Zionist values, including pragmatism, including future orientation, including the very basic humanism of the dignity of human lives, including non-Jews. And it is due to a very unfortunate political constellation that the minority who has given up on these values, or even detests them or condescends to them, is now in power, largely not due to being a majority electorally, but due to political corruption. Corruption kills. In the case of Israel, corruption has already killed. And this corruption is bringing forward disproportionately the numbers of people, the groups who have given up on the Israeli Declaration of Independence. I believe that a solid majority of Israelis, both center-right, and of course center-left and left, have not abandoned the Declaration of Independence. And this is where we need to regroup and to realign. Hopefully, if no further catastrophes are in the way, the next elections, which is way too far, in the autumn of 26, would show that a solid majority of Israelis hold the values of Humanist Zionism, i.e. the values of the Declaration of Independence. We shall see.
And we shall hope. Let me ask you, there is sometimes a kind of fatalism, it seems, when within Israel, among kind of the secular, liberal Jews that you describe, and outside, looking at the demographics of Israeli society and looking at the groups within Israeli society that are the fastest growing. That is, of course, the ultra-Orthodox, first and foremost, but also the Palestinian Arab community, two communities that are not Zionists, two communities that are whose numbers in the future will grow and increase. So how do you involve these communities who do not identify with Zionism, do not into this kind of project, in a sense? How can they be incorporated? Or what would you say to those who look at this demographic trend and say, the kind of humanistic Zionism is dying out precisely because its carriers are shrinking as a percentage of Israel's population?
Well, the demography of the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel is growing, I would say exponentially, or at least very fast. Not so the demography of Arab Israeli citizens, which is quite stable. And we are much more successful, and here I'm speaking as a professor in the University of Haifa, we are much more successful in inviting young Arab men and women, Arab Israeli citizens, to higher education, to the professions, to mainstream Israeli society, to the middle class, to moderation, than we are, for obvious reasons, with the ultra-Orthodox community who is not coming to our universities. And if they do, they demand a total segregation of men from women and vice versa. And they wish to allow male professors to teach both men and women. But female professors like myself are only allowed to teach women. This is not tolerable in my mind, in the mind of many others, and is a hindrance to the entrance of young ultra-Orthodox men and women to the universities. So there's a real blockage there, and demography is not on the side of seculars or liberals or moderate, modern, Orthodox, conservative, reform Jews of any moderate color. It's a huge problem. And that is why the crisis we are facing now is not only the post-7 of October crisis, it's also the crisis of democracy, the new legislation by our government, which is set to restart when the Knesset reconvenes after the holiday of Sukkot. And it is the huge disagreement, which has now come from under the covers, from out of the closet, between ultra-Orthodox and others about serving in the army and earning one's living. And this would cause some kind of an explosion, hopefully of the better kind, in which Israelis, so long as we are still a majority, center ground Israelis, middle Israel, would realign in order to face these issues too. But I'm telling you and I'm promising you that my kind of Israel, which is not only the kibbutz in Tel Aviv, but encompasses every moderate Zionist Jew and many, many moderate Arab citizens, will not stick around if the current political trends win the day in the coming elections. We will know, maybe we old timers would, because who would take me at the age of 63? I don't see any other country that would accept me to its gates, but the young people, the educated young people, the high-tech empire, the movers and pushers, the media people, the secular liberals will not stay. And this is not a threat, this is a prophecy which I think will not be fulfilled for the simple reasons that we are now up and awake. And we shall fight for our Israel in the coming elections and before and after in order to keep it going. to resuscitate it, which is the right thing to do, and still just about possible to do today.
So we have about just under 15 minutes left, and quite a few questions have come in, not surprisingly, about the Palestinian issue and about the conflict. So I want to try and put a few of those, kind of group a couple of them together. A question that came in from Judea Pearl, my colleague at UCLA, asking about whether the depth and extent of Palestinian rejectionism of Zionism has increased or decreased from 1947. This is a big question till today. How do you see the trend line among Palestinians towards Zionism? Is there any shift in that you see in terms of their attitudes towards Zionism or their willingness to come to terms with the Zionist movement? And I'm going to add on another question that came in to that, which is about whether because this comes up often, that there is no Palestinian partner, essentially, that Israel, it's all very well talk about peace and coexistence, but there's no partner on the other side. So we have a question asking about whether you could say something about the Palestinians who you've been able to talk with, to collaborate with, that gives you belief in this possibility for kind of peaceful coexistence in the future.
Yes, well, these are excellent questions, which beyond which there is, of course, a reproach, which I humbly accept, which is, what are you talking about? The Palestinians don't want the two-state solution. The Palestinians don't want peace with Israel, but what I've called the peace of the dead Jews, which is a silent Jew-less Middle East. And many of them do. And I think many of them have wanted this ever since 1948. There may have been some lost opportunities in the 1950s, certainly in the 1990s. We will not get into this now. But to this, I say the following. Many Palestinians that I know, especially in the West Bank, less so in recent years in Gaza, are willing to consider the one-state solution, which is somehow to join Israel, to become full Israeli citizens, to enjoy the rights and privileges of Israeli citizens, which is perfectly understandable, and maybe take it from there and become a majority at some point and make it into an Arab country, with or without tolerance, complacency towards the Jewish minority as it is. I don't see this happening now, not anymore. I was always against the one-state solution for several reasons, including my wish to have at this day and age still the nation state for the Jews and all its citizens that my grandparents dreamed of. I think it's too early to part ways with that dream. I talked about it maybe on the future horizon. But after the 7th of October, people will have to understand that the one-state solution is dead, not the two-state solution, the one-state solution. We cannot live as fellow citizens with the people who cheered Hamas on the streets of Gaza on that day, with the numerous civilians, possibly a majority in Gaza, possibly a majority in the West Bank, who cheered. Now, many Palestinian friends tell me that they didn't, certainly not by the time it dawned on them what's happening, and I understood the enormity and the barbarity and the monstrosity of it all. It is my moral duty as an Israeli to be ready when finally a moderate, reasonable, pragmatic Palestinian leadership emerges. And that may take a while. And in the meantime, we need to get our own sights on this goal, on the goal of partition. But it is not for tomorrow morning. I would like that to make that clear. We also need, and that's something we haven't mentioned in the discussion, a very powerful hands-on international presence here. I don't mind the world stepping in to manage the conflict, since Israel has failed so miserably in its recent government's policy of managing the conflict with Hamas. We need strong and honest international powers, perhaps the United States, depending on the future, perhaps the EU, perhaps the moderate Arab regimes, to jointly be able to police a separation, gradual separation between Israel and Palestine, pending the rise of moderate leaderships both here and there. And I can tell you that, Dov, that we might have a moderate negotiation-ready government here long before we will have it on the other side. I'm aware of that. But we need to be ready for it because this is our only bloodless horizon. We don't have that many other choices.
So on that topic, Ralph Deja asks, what can we non-Israeli and non-Jewish friends of peace between Israelis and Palestinians do to strengthen the moderates, to make them more, to raise those voices? I mean, well, you mentioned for the US government or the EU, but yes, for the people out there listening to this, what can they do, if anything, to contribute to this process?
First and foremost, to do what they already do, the good friends of Israel, which is think in a nuanced way and embrace the moderates on both sides. Also discern between Israeli civil society that has shown its beautiful face, especially in the immediate aftermath of the 7th of October 23. Discern between this civil society and the current government and aim their ire, the way I aim my ire, towards, I'm sorry for being political again, the current government, while embracing, literally hugging in the emotional sense, but also helping out the Israeli moderate civil society. It's there. We need friendship. Now, nobody can win the elections for us. We have to do it. Nobody can change government but us. We have to do it. But you need to realize that this is not the same Israel. The government today, the coalition today, 64 Knesset members, 30-odd ministers, most of them I don't know what they do all day, are not the Israeli public, not anymore. And this is very, very important. So yes, we need your friendship, we need your discernment, and we need what pressure you can exercise on both sides, Palestinian leadership and the current Israeli leadership, either to rise up to the challenge or to go away and leave some space for new people to lead. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Well, I think that seems like an appropriate note to end things, because I hope your words, and not only your words, which are very powerful and I'm sure have resonated with many people, but also the spirit behind them, the indefatigable spirit. I want to leave our audience with both of those things and the message that is so timely and so important in this very, very challenging, difficult moment, both for
Israel. Well, I'm a kibbutznik, so once kibbutznik, always a kibbutznik.
So thank you so much for speaking with us today. We very much hope to bring you to our campus in the future so we can welcome you in person. But I want to thank you very much now for such an important message to our audience. I want to thank all of our audience members for joining us wherever you are in the world. This talk will be made available. It's been recorded. It will be made shortly available on the Nazarian Center's website and our YouTube channel. So please share the talk with friends and family, spread the word, come to our future events, and wishing everybody a Shana Tova. Happy New Year. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. Oz-Salzberger.
Shana Tova, Chatima Tova, bring back our hostages. Thank you.